In this episode, we're going to learn a way of thinking that turns a confusing intrusion into something you can describe clearly without losing important detail. When beginners first read about threat intelligence and incident response, it can feel like there are endless models, endless jargon, and endless diagrams that all claim to explain attacks. The Diamond Model of Intrusion Analysis, DMIA, is different in a helpful way because it is small on purpose, and that simplicity makes it powerful. Instead of trying to list every possible step an attacker might take, it asks you to focus on 4 core things that must exist for an intrusion to happen. When you can name those 4 things and explain how they relate, you can talk about an intrusion in a way that is both grounded and easy to communicate. The goal here is clarity, not perfection, so you can build understanding that helps defenders act. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. The Diamond idea starts with the fact that an intrusion is not just malware on a computer, and it is not just an attacker doing something bad. It is an interaction, and interactions have required parts. The model says there are 4 vertices, which are the adversary, the capability, the infrastructure, and the victim. The adversary is the human or group making decisions, even if you do not know their real identity. The capability is what they use to create effects, which can include malware, scripts, exploits, social engineering content, or techniques for abusing accounts. The infrastructure is what connects the adversary to the victim, such as servers, domains, accounts, or communication channels. The victim is the target, which can be a person, a device, a service, an organization, or even a specific data set. When you hold these 4 parts in your head, you stop seeing intrusions as random events and start seeing them as structured relationships you can analyze. A major reason the Diamond Model helps beginners is that it forces you to ask balanced questions instead of getting stuck on the most obvious artifact. Many people look at a malware sample and assume they have the whole story because malware feels tangible and technical. The model reminds you that capability is only one vertex, and that the same capability can be reused by different adversaries across different victims. It also reminds you that infrastructure can be shared or compromised, and that infrastructure changes quickly, so it can be both useful and misleading. By including the victim as a first-class vertex, the model encourages you to ask why this target, why now, and what exposure made the intrusion possible. By including the adversary as a vertex, it encourages you to consider intent and decision-making, even if you never attach a real-world name. This balanced view is what creates clarity, because you have a complete set of categories for the facts you gather. To see how this works in practice, imagine you detect a suspicious login and then find a script running on a server that starts reaching out to a remote address. Without a model, you might describe this as we got hacked and it is running malware, which is true but not very helpful. With the Diamond, you can say the victim is this specific server or service, the capability is the script and the techniques it uses, the infrastructure is the remote endpoint it contacts and any accounts it leverages, and the adversary is the actor controlling the operation through those resources. Even if you cannot fully name the adversary, you can still describe their behavior as an operational entity. Once you describe it this way, you can ask better follow-up questions, like whether other victims exist, whether infrastructure overlaps with prior activity, and whether the capability resembles a known family. Clarity appears because your description naturally points to what you should investigate next. A useful habit is to start filling in the diamond with whatever you know, even if some vertices are blank at first. Beginners sometimes think analysis must wait until you have everything, but that delays action. If you have only the victim and a hint of capability, you can still begin. If you see a malicious file on a workstation, your victim is that workstation and the user, and your capability is the file and its behaviors. You may not yet know infrastructure or adversary, but the model makes the missing pieces obvious. That helps you focus data collection, such as looking for outbound connections to identify infrastructure, or looking for similar activity on other hosts to see if the capability is wider. In this way, the diamond becomes both a description tool and a search tool. It is a simple frame that tells you what you know and what you need. The infrastructure vertex deserves special attention because it often becomes the first thing defenders can act on quickly. If you see a domain or address being contacted, you can sometimes block it, sinkhole it, or at least monitor it. However, the diamond model also helps you avoid overvaluing infrastructure because infrastructure is often the easiest thing for attackers to change. A domain can be replaced, an address can be rotated, and a server can be abandoned as soon as it is burned. That means infrastructure evidence is excellent for immediate containment and for linking near-term events, but it is weaker for long-term attribution or deep conclusions. The model encourages you to treat infrastructure as a connector between adversary and victim, not as proof of identity. When you keep that mindset, you still use infrastructure aggressively for defense, but you do not let it trick you into making claims you cannot support. The capability vertex is also broader than many beginners expect, and that broader view is a big part of why the model improves clarity. Capability can include malware, but it can also include a phishing lure, a stolen credential, a technique for abusing a cloud service, or a method for persisting through scheduled tasks. If you treat capability as only malware, you may miss the real lever that made the intrusion work. For example, an attacker may use a very basic script, but the real capability is the ability to authenticate with a valid account and blend into normal administrative activity. In another case, the malware may be complex, but the real capability that matters is a simple exploit that opens the door. When you broaden capability this way, you can prioritize defensive tasks more effectively because you focus on what enabled the attacker to succeed. This is one reason the diamond model connects naturally to practical defense work. The victim vertex can also be analyzed in a deeper way than simply naming the compromised device, and this is where the model pushes you toward meaningful context. A victim is not just a machine. It is a machine in a role, touched by certain users, containing certain data, and exposed in certain ways. If you identify the victim as a payroll system, the business risk looks different than if you identify the victim as a public kiosk. If you identify the victim as a developer workstation with access to repositories, the risk includes intellectual property and supply chain concerns. By being precise about the victim, you can explain why the intrusion matters and what consequences could follow. You can also identify what the attacker likely wanted, which shapes what you search for next. In a team environment, describing the victim clearly is often what makes leaders pay attention, because it translates technical facts into real-world impact. Now let's talk about the adversary vertex in a way that does not require guessing names or countries, because that is where beginners often get uncomfortable. In the diamond model, adversary can be treated as an operational entity, meaning you can describe what the actor does even if you do not know who they are. You might know they operate during certain hours, prefer certain victim types, reuse certain capabilities, or favor certain infrastructure patterns. Those are adversary traits that matter for defense because they help you predict behavior. This is also where restraint becomes a strength, because you can be very informative without being speculative. Instead of claiming a specific actor, you can say the activity suggests an adversary that is capable of credential abuse and remote execution, and that they are using infrastructure patterns seen in similar campaigns. That style keeps the analysis grounded and still gives the defender useful expectations. One of the most practical uses of the diamond model is linking, which means connecting multiple events or intrusions by shared vertices. If two incidents share the same capability, like a distinctive loader behavior, you may link them through capability even if infrastructure differs. If two incidents share infrastructure, like the same domain pattern, you may link them through infrastructure even if the malware differs. If two incidents share the same victim type, like targeting finance staff across organizations, you may link them through victim selection and motive. If you see repeated overlaps, the links get stronger because they suggest a coherent set of relationships rather than coincidence. This linking is exactly how you move from a single alert to a campaign narrative in a disciplined way. The diamond makes the linking method explicit, which improves clarity because you can explain why you think two things are connected. Another helpful concept is that the diamond supports the idea of pivoting, which is a fancy word for using one known fact to find related facts. If you know an infrastructure indicator, you can pivot to find other hosts that contacted it, which expands victim identification. If you know a capability trait, you can pivot to find other samples or behaviors that match it, which expands your understanding of the tool set. If you know the victim context, you can pivot to find other high-risk systems with similar exposure, which supports proactive hunting. If you know an adversary behavior pattern, you can pivot to look for their typical next steps, which can reveal hidden persistence. The beauty is that pivoting is not random. It is driven by the vertices and their relationships. This turns the model into a practical guide for investigative momentum, which is exactly what beginners need when they are not sure where to look next. The diamond model also helps you communicate with different audiences without changing the truth, only changing the level of detail. A technical audience may want to hear about capability specifics and infrastructure indicators, while a leadership audience may care more about victim impact and adversary intent. If you organize your findings around the vertices, you can present the same intrusion coherently to both groups by emphasizing different parts. You can explain, for instance, that the capability used was a credential theft technique. The infrastructure included external access points. The victim was a system tied to sensitive data, and the adversary behavior suggests follow-on attempts. That is a complete description that does not depend on jargon, and it naturally supports decisions like containment scope, monitoring focus, and risk communication. Clarity is not just about being simple. It is about being structured in a way that holds up under questions. As we wrap up, modeling intrusions with the diamond gives you a compact but powerful way to understand and explain what is going on. By focusing on adversary, capability, infrastructure, and victim, you gain a set of categories that makes messy evidence easier to organize. You also gain a disciplined way to link related events and to pivot from one clue to the next without getting lost. Most importantly, you avoid common beginner traps like over-focusing on a malware label, over-trusting infrastructure indicators, or overreaching on attribution. The diamond model does not replace other models, but it gives you a clear backbone that you can use alongside them, especially when you need to communicate under pressure. If you practice filling in the vertices with only what you can support, and you treat missing vertices as prompts for targeted investigation, you will find that your analysis becomes calmer, clearer, and far more useful to the people who have to act on it.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit BareMetalCyber.com.